During the second half of 4.8, Emilie was released, and she was meant to serve as our first dedicated burning unit. Given how it can take quite some time to release units that would synergize well with each other, I was initially worried that Emilie would spearhead the niche, but be left alone for months or even years without someone in the same field. But just one version later, we're being introduced to Kinich, a new Dendro DPS who specializes in burning and Burgeon teams, allowing us to continue exploring both of these niches. In this video, I will be covering Kinich's kit, and then I'm going to break down his game design and explain why he works so well in his particular field. As a reminder, this is a kit analysis, not a guide, and it's from a game design standpoint, not a meta one. All of my usual disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, and music credits are down below. Without further ado, let's talk about Kinich. To start us off, let's explain Kinich's combat in-game. His skill is where he shines the most, so let's get that covered first. When you use his skill with an enemy nearby, he Spider-Man grapples onto them and enters his Night Soul Blessing state. He's going to start off at 0 Night Soul points, and you can gain points in multiple ways. 1, he gets 2 points every second. 2, his normal attacks will change to fire off these pellets called loop shots, and hitting enemies with these will grant 3 Night Soul points. Number 3, there will be a blind spot that spawns occasionally, and crossing into that blind spot will grant you 4 points. His fourth method is tied to his A1 passive. When he hits enemies with his skill, they enter a Desolation state. Enemies in this state that take burning and Burgeon damage will grant Kinich 7 Night Soul points. This is the main aspect that pushes his kit into a burning/Burgeon niche as opposed to a Hyperbloom or Quicken one. The core of his gameplay is playing a little mini-game within a game. Just like any classic arcade game, you want to gain as many points as possible in as little time as possible. But what exactly are you trying to achieve with these points? Once Kinich reaches his max points of 20, he can use his skill again and fire off a giant cannonball that deals massive damage to enemies. And when I say massive, I mean massive. At level 8, it has over 1000% attack scaling. So the goal's simple, right? Get points as fast as possible so you can use his cannonball as many times as possible. Going off that, his A4 passive will give him a damage bonus to his cannonball, scaling off 320% of his attack. This occurs when allies trigger Night Soul Burst, and it can stack up to 2 times. In the scenario where Kinich is a solo Natlan unit, you're likely only going to get 1 stack per rotation. Still, 1000% attack ceiling is super crazy, and going up to 13 to 1400% is going to be even crazier. And finally, Kinich's burst allows him to use the Omnitrix, unleashing the Ender Dragon on a, quote-unquote, limited, conditional, restricted, contractual, partial, temporary basis. After this, the Ender Dragon fires Gaster Blasters, dealing AoE Dendro damage. It's a nice boost in damage output and Dendro application, but outside of that, it's not a necessary thing to use, so you don't have to focus on his ER. Now that we've covered his combat, I'll go into what made his design really cool and really well executed in my eyes. The goal of his kit design was clear: Dendro DPS with a niche in Burning and Burgeon, both of which are less popular compared to the other reactions. The challenge is that Quicken and Hyperbloom are right there, so pushing him into a Pyro-related team required him to have some aspects that also pulled him away from the Electro-based groups. Fortunately, he has both direct and indirect ways to incentivize that playstyle. Let's get direct out of the way. His A1 passive is literally telling you, hey, use him in Burning and Burgeon for special bonuses. Run him in these comms and you can use his cannonball more often. Because of its super high damage scaling, getting even 1 more shot is a huge boost. Rather than getting 2 to 3 per rotation, you're firing out 3 to 4. The second thing to note is his scaling type. His damage is purely based on attack, and nothing in EM stats. Looking at other Dendro characters, notice how Tighnari has a passive increasing his damage based on EM? This passive essentially allows him to double dip into that stat, 1 dip in Quicken and the other in his passive. Characters like Alhaitham and Nahida have triple dipping, 1 in Quicken, 1 in their passives, and another in their talent scaling, which causes them to scale on both attack and EM. Kinich being Dendro gives him an innate dip in Quicken, but that's where the EM benefits start and stop. Even in Quicken teams, this stat provides much less value. The next factor is his somewhat slow application, specifically on the little loop shots. These attacks have a special 2-second ICD. In my eyes, the application is fast enough to where it can maintain an aura for Burning and Bloom procs, but it's very much slower in the Quicken department. Compare this to Tighnari, who can trigger Spread twice every charge shot. For estimation purposes, he can fire off 3 shots in roughly 4 to 5 seconds. In the same 4-second duration, Kinich is triggering 2 spreads, whereas Tighnari can trigger 6. And to finish off the list, his high multipliers actually play a role in Quicken's value. Quicken is an additive base damage bonus, and technically speaking, the bonus it provides is the same regardless of the talent multiplier. But when you look at it through the lens of relativity, additive bonuses grant more value when the original multiplier is low, and less value when it's high. Kinich's loop shots have a pretty low scaling, so Quicken would technically have more value on these hits. But we've already established that his ICD being slow means less triggers and less spread value. Meanwhile, his burst and cannonball shot have pretty high attack scaling, so its value also feels less impactful. I like speaking in analogies, so to give you more of a visual example, let's view it as pouring water. Take a puddle and pour a bucket of water on it. The increase in volume feels pretty big, right? Now, take an ocean and pour out the same amount of water. Technically speaking, you contributed the same amount of water, but when you view it in relativity, one situation saw noticeable change while the other did not. Same thing applies here. Quicken is adding the same numerical bonus, but when the base damage is already high, it feels like a drop in the ocean. And you want to hear something even funnier? You can also view this idea in a philosophical or existential lens. Think about the time that you injured your knee or helped a random stranger, when you made someone's day or failed that big test. In the moment, these might seem like big deals, but in the grand scheme of everything that was and ever will be, that doesn't really matter now, does it? The universe was created, and one day it will end. And when that happens, these moments will be but specks of dust in the endless stream of time. Kinich's design on his various attacks and scalings all cause Quicken to be much more mediocre compared to other Dendro units. When looking at his relation to the reaction, there's actually not a lot to get excited about. And since the bar is lower on his Quicken teams, all he needed was a proper incentive to run him elsewhere, which is exactly what his A1 passive does. As I mentioned before, Burning and Burgeon grant him more points for his cannonball shot, allowing him to use it more often, and with a multiplier as high as it is, even one more shot can completely change his overall damage output. This damage is so high in fact that it also makes the smaller added bonuses of Quicken completely incomparable. His raw damage simply has no use for the reaction. Part of what I like about its design is that it technically still works in Quicken. Aside from extra cannonball shots, there isn't really anything you lose out on when running him in such teams. This is a very different situation to Emilie, who has a very huge reliance on Burning. For her, if Burning isn't present, you lose out on her level 2 skill, her A1 bonus hits, and her A4 bonus damage. Nearly her entire kit doesn't work without the reaction. I also do want to mention though that the indirect factors I mentioned with Kinich's kit also apply to Emilie. Pure attack scaling, low application, and her burst and A1 passive have very high scalings, which means that even if she could utilize Quicken, it wouldn't be as valuable as other Dendro units. I find the way the devs designed these two characters were great in addressing the Quicken problems. It's able to make them shine in these Burning/Burgeon teams without making them godly in Quicken or Hyperbloom. This also applies to non-Dendro characters. Slower rates of application actually create opportunities for different niches of other elements. Mualani explored Forward Vape by having her kit provide slower Hydro application. Meanwhile, Toma, while not a direct Burgeon unit, has a lot of elements that pushed him into that niche. His rate of fire is pretty fast, but his actual application is very slow. The slow application meant that Vaporize didn't really work that well. And since its damage was very low, it meant that forward melts, while possible, also weren't that good. But since application is per entity, a newly made Bloom Core could instantly trigger, allowing for Burgeon to both consistently and quickly occur. A Pyro unit with slow application and high damage would be perfect for forward melt. Add the right elements into their kit and you can push them towards burning niches instead. And then slower Electro application can prevent aggravate. Fucking hell, why can't I say aggravate? And then slower Electro application can prevent aggravate from taking over a specific team comp. But add the right buffs and you can have a solid Electrocharge DPS, maybe even Superconduct. So to summarize, I think Kinich's design and how they implemented his kit is perfect for pushing his Burning and Burgeon niches. I'm also glad it didn't take us years for Kinich to come out, because at least now, Emilie has a suitable partner to duo with in Burning teams. Since she covers the off-field role and Kinich covers on-field, I highly doubt we're going to get a dedicated Dendro Burning DPS anytime soon. And fortunately, with the units we currently have, I'm very confident there are a ton of team options to work with these two already. That's going to do it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about my points. Do you agree or disagree? Is there anything I may have missed? And if you want, let me know what you think about Kinich's kit, and whether you'll be pulling for him or not. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!